From Ecclesiastes. There is a vanity that takes place on earth, that there are righteous people who are treated according to the conduct of the wicked, and there are wicked people who are treated according to the conduct of the righteous. I said that this also is vanity. So I commend enjoyment, for there is nothing better for people under the sun than to eat and drink and enjoy themselves. For this will go with them in their toil through the days of life that God gives them under the sun. And from the Gospel of Luke. Then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly, and he thought to himself, "What should I do, for I have no place to store my crops?" Then he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry, go to Spain.'" But God said to him, "You fool! This very night your life is being demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God."
And may the words of my mouth and the generosity of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. When it comes to generosity, I have to admit that I have a problem with that. I don't really consider myself a particularly generous person. I'm not an Ebenezer Scrooge or anything like that, but seriously, of all of the resilience characteristics that we're going through in this series, generosity is the one I struggle with the most. Just recently, just last Friday, in fact, our youngest daughter, Marin, she finished her second year in the architecture program at UNL, and she had all of one day to move everything from our apartment back home and then leave for Denver on Saturday. And she'd put this off, she'd put it off, she didn't check with us asking for help in advance and all this. And so Friday, Melanie's waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning, getting ready for work, and she turns to me and asks, "Do you think I ought to call in for a personal day so I can go to Lincoln and help Marin?" And I'm like, "What? No, definitely not. Marin needs to learn how to plan in advance and ask for help in advance. No, you definitely should not." And I thought with that ultra-logical explanation, the thing was solved. Until I heard Melanie on the phone, "Hello, I need to take a personal day from work." So her generosity beat out the logic of the situation, and that's kind of where she's at. I kind of depend on her for the generous part of life. Really, when you just kind of exist in a logical framework, you're never going to be particularly generous, because generosity, by definition, means giving above and beyond what is logical or rational or reasonable. It's about an overabundance, not just simply kind of a utilitarian exchange of things or what have, or a lesson to be taught. No, so Melanie kind of got the generosity card on Friday. But, I've had a long struggle with generosity, quite frankly. I remember in college when I went to Nantes, France to study, there was one day where I'd been wanting to go to this cathedral that's dedicated to St. Francis that was across town. St. Francis being that saint, who loved nature, but also was known for his generosity towards the poor, especially. And I'd really wanted to see this cathedral. I needed to set out early to start walking. I was a little late, so I was walking fast to get there. And about 50 yards ahead of me at one point, I noticed a woman who was obviously homeless, who was crumpled up on the sidewalk, just crying directly in my path. And I thought, well, what should I do? And my first thought was, I don't know French that well. What if she tells me stuff I don't understand, or I want to tell her stuff that she can't understand? That was my first excuse. I did live with a French family. I was getting along fine with them. And my second excuse was, well, I'm going to miss church if I stop and help this woman. And I realized that she hadn't seen me yet, and her back was against the other side of the street, so I could just kind of slink over to the other side and move on. She'd never know if I did that. And that's exactly what I did. It's exactly what I did until the hypocrisy just was too much for me, and I, being the Pharisee who crossed over the other side of the road like Jesus' Good Samaritan parable, and also the fact, the irony of heading to a church that's known for generosity of the poor and skipping helping a poor person in order to get to church. For this, no. I turned and retraced my steps, and I stopped in a bakery on the way to pick up a couple chocolate croissants to share a little love and joy with this woman in whatever way I could. But by the time I got back, she had vanished. I remember kind of praying under my breath, Jesus, I hope that wasn't you. And almost hearing a voice saying, does it really matter who it was who was there? Generosity has been a problem for me for a long time. I think, if I'm going to look for an explanation for that, not to explain myself away, but I think it really, from the earliest days I can remember, I struggled with this, and part of that is because I grew up actually in a very, very wealthy community, a suburb of Seattle named Mercer Island, very, very wealthy community, but my family was not of wealth. My family only lived on Mercer Island because my parents were school teachers who taught in the district. But at a young age, I didn't understand economics and all this. All I knew was that, in my perception, normal people, meaning everybody I knew at school, normal people lived in really big houses and drove really fancy cars and went on ski vacations and owned boats for boating in the summer and did all these things. And my parents did or had none of this in my family. And so in my impression was that we were not normal, that there was something that I could not put my finger on that we lacked that prevented us from being normal. And so it didn't matter what the situation, I couldn't put my finger on what it was, but if I was in a group of people, kids I perceived to be intelligent, well, I wouldn't open my mouth because I figured I might lack intelligence enough to carry the conversation. Or if a cool kid took a liking to me, I would, as quickly as I could, shy away because I knew that cool kid would soon discover what a nerd I must be, and so on. And from a very young age, because we didn't have all these things, I thought, well, I just became convinced that our family was probably one step away from homelessness, even though we always had plenty there. But that's my kid's mind, and that's the kid's tape that began to be recorded in me. So this feeling that I lack something that everybody else has that I do not. And that's a tape that continues to play in me. No matter how much I try to overrun that tape, it continues to play to the point where I kind of get used to, okay, I'm never going to get rid of it. It's just there. It's just there. So, but if you wonder, for instance, why I chose to go as a minister to the most rigorous seminary I could find, Princeton Seminary, and I spent, after the 3-year MDiv degree that's required for ministry, I spent an extra 5 to earn a PhD in biblical studies. Well, part of it is, yes, I enjoyed that kind of stuff, but there's also another motivation. That tape playing, normal ministers need this, an MDiv, but you lack something. You're going to need to have a superabundance of a specialized skill. You're going to have to be uber prepared so that nobody else will notice you lack in all these other areas, and you'll be prepared. You'll actually have something more there. That's what was also kept my candles burning at night, studying, so to speak. That was also there. Consequently, my basic MO is that I am a hoarder. I hoard stuff. Not material items. I do hoard books. But books aren't really what I'm hoarding. What I'm hoarding is knowledge. Knowledge about my craft as a minister. I can't have enough of that. I hoard my time. In fact, when I'm not working at church, you'll find me normally actually engaged in activities that I think are helping make me a better minister, rather than just going out and having fun or frivolity or what have you. Or when I do go out for fun and frivolity, oftentimes it's because I realize that to be a good minister, you also need to let your hair down once in a while. So it's still trying to be uber competent, fulfill that lack that's there. So when I hear Jesus' parable about this man who spends his time continually building up reserves, so he's uber prepared for the future, I take that as a direct threat to my basic MO. I mean, I don't see in this parable a man who's like super stingy and uncaring and Ebenezer Scrooge kind of guy. What I see in this parable is a person who's been convinced, like I was, that everybody else has something that you're lacking, that you don't quite have enough, so you've got to be uber prepared for the future. And is preparing himself for the day that maybe one day he can actually eat, drink, and be merry and not have that tape constantly going like, what else are you preparing for? What else? How else can you overcome what's there? And Jesus says that this man was not seeking first the kingdom of God. And that he actually, in doing that, was not generous toward God. And I think, and I'm a minister, and if that parable's me, I'm not being generous toward God, I guess I'm guilty as charged. And I'm not sure there's a court of appeals up in heaven that will take my case.
Continuing in Luke, he said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your span of life? If then you are not able to do so small a thing as that, why do you worry about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all of his glory was not clothed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? And do not keep striving for what you are to eat and what you are to drink, and do not keep worrying. For it is the nations of the world that strive after all these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, strive for the kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give alms. Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also."
So Jesus accuses this guy of not being generous toward God because he's not being generous towards himself or other people and trying to hoard all that for the future. And because God is a generous God, God wants to be generous to you and to others. So we step out of the flow of God when we're not generous to ourselves and others. Therefore, we're not being generous toward God. There's the linkage. And really, if we're not being generous, we're really not going to be very resilient or courageous in life. If we're only ever thinking about what we're lacking, then it doesn't matter how much we have. We're not being very resilient, are we? We're not going to be able to adjust. We're always worrying about what we haven't have, even when we have. But we're also not going to be very courageous because, again, if we're always thinking about what we don't have, we're probably not going to step up to the plate when we need to step up in a time of crisis because we're all worried, well, we don't have enough yet. How could I have more to spare to meet this challenge? And if Jesus basically says, hey, you don't believe me? If you don't believe that you're stepping out of the flow of God when you fail to be generous to yourself and to others, when you fail to notice, as we heard from Rebecca, that you are enough because you are God's child, then he says, well, look at God. Look at God. I mean, God clothes even the lilies of the field more generously than Solomon had, more, with greater garments than Solomon. God feeds the sparrows and the robins and the birds of the air. They always have enough to eat. And God makes God's sun and to shine and God's rain to fall on the righteous and the unrighteous alike. God even says, be generous to your enemies. I mean, when Jesus says, love your enemies, it's the same thing, isn't it? I mean, if you're not being, is loving, can you be non-generous and loving? Be generous even to your enemies. That's the way God works. And if God works for the sparrows and the birds and the plants and animals and stuff, if they always have more than enough, why don't you think you will have enough? Because God considers you to be pretty important too. So get into this flow or you get out of God. You kind of absent yourself from this basic flow in life. I mean, Jesus really operates not on the kind of the zero-sum model. The zero-sum model. He does not see life as like a pie, that the more pieces you give away, the less you have for yourself. He operates out of an abundance model. Many of you who are parents of multiple children, really get the abundance model like he envisioned it just automatically through being a parent. How many of you have more than one child? Raise your hand. Okay. Now keep your hands raised if in having the extra child you did not find the love you had inside you decrease, but actually found it increase. Okay, see, point well taken. Now, I did see somebody kind of waffling like this, and at 9 o'clock, I actually saw a child holding up her mother's arm. But you get the point, It's the more, that classic principle, the more you give, the more you actually receive. Your heart grows when you do this. It does not shrink like a pie being consumed until the very last crumb, right? So, boy, do I ever feel like a hypocrite in trying to preach about everybody should be more generous, because that's what I have a hard time. There's that zero sum going around in my child's gut that still affects me to this day. But maybe I can be generous in one thing, that is generously telling you how sinful I am, and that I'm not holding myself up as a role model in this. And maybe I can be generous in one other way, and that is people like us, like me, who have a problem with generosity, also know more than others how lack of generosity hurts your own self, and why generosity would be so much healthier to have. One of the greatest things you can do to avoid that feeling of just constant lack is to identify something you feel like you're lacking in and start to give it away. Give it away. And discover that, oh my gosh, the sky did not fall. Life still goes on, and I still have something of that with me, and I'm still feeling content and happy and thankful for what I have. So for me, I try to give away a little more time, and for me that means be frivolous, waste time. Don't just always try to be a better minister with your time, but waste a little time. It means give a little bit more of my emotional energy to others, because I'm worried that if I do that, they're going to sap more and more, and I won't have enough for myself. Well, give a little bit more, and realize, actually I gained energy through the exchange, didn't lose it. It's actually the reason why I tithe. I tithe not because I'm holier than those who don't tithe or more spiritually healthy. It's because of my spiritual sickness. By giving away 10% of my net income every month, what I discover is I can do that and I still can make my mortgage payment. I can still put food on the table. I can still send my children to college. All those different things that I'd worry about, I would naturally go to, like I can't do, no. I realize yes. And that heals something inside of me that was sick. So I'm trying more and more areas of my life to kind of do that, the tithing thing, tithe my time by wasting 10% of my time. Tithe my emotional energy by giving another more emotional energy away. I'm even trying to tithe my prayer time, not pray 10% of the time, but rather devote at least 10% of my time praying for other people. I have to confess, as a minister, it wasn't until a few years ago that I actually started praying earnestly for other people, even though I would tell people, I'll pray for you. I would offer a couple seconds, but I was always worried, well, if I pray too much for others, like in a really engaged way, I won't have time to pray for myself, or to, even more important, listening for God's guidance. And how could I do that? I need to be guided by God, and I won't have enough time for all that. And God's kind of hard to hear sometimes, so I need extra time for that. And what I've realized in tithing that time back to other people was God can speak pretty doggone well and guide you pretty well when you're praying for other people as well. There is no lack of time when you begin to do this. So I hope I'm not being too hypocritical by standing up here and suggesting maybe we all could be a bit more generous, recognizing that you are all more generous likely than I am. But maybe, if we could all find those areas of our life where maybe we're a bit consumed by lack, where we don't feel like we are enough or have enough, if we could step a little bit more boldly into that, maybe we would all start to trust Jesus' words more, that we don't have to worry so much about our lives. We don't have to worry so much about all these things we lack. that this generous God actually is here with us and for us and works through us, maybe we could do that. Then again, maybe not. I don't know. But what I do know is that people who don't worry so much about their lives, they act with greater courage and resiliency in life than those who are constantly worrying. Amen. So as much as I struggle with generosity, there is one area of my life where I actually find it no trouble whatsoever to give, and give generously, and give freely, and give joyously. And that is when it comes to extending a word of God's love and grace to people who feel like they've been on the outside of love and grace, and I could do so because I'm spending God's love and grace, not mine. Love and grace, God shows God has more than enough of to give, so much that we can give it away too. When God shows us through Jesus how generous and kind God really is. When God shows us through Jesus, when He and God are speaking as one, this is my body which is broken for you. This is my blood which is shed for you. As often as you eat of this bread and drink of this cup, remember, you are enough for me and my love. Give as you've received. These are the gifts of God for the people of God. I invite our servers to come prepare the feast. As they do so, I invite you to join me in reminding ourselves of who we are and whose we are. We are an inclusive, open, and affirming family of faith, welcoming all to God's table of love and acceptance. We are diverse, yet united by Christ's example. We care for one another, support one another, and challenge one another to become all that God creates us to be. We work together to nurture our community and to promote peace and justice in our conflicted world. You do not have to be a member of Countryside Community Church or subscribe to any particular doctrine or dogma to come forward to this table. Know that if your heart calls you forward, you are most welcome here. So likewise, if you'd prefer to receive communion from your seat, simply raise your hand as a deacon passes and you'll be served there. Or if you prefer to abstain altogether and just simply be with us in this moment, that's a precious thing too. But if you do come forward, we invite you to take a piece of bread, dip it into the cup. Well, that wasn't a very generous piece. Take a generous piece. Dip it into the cup. And as you take this into your own body and blood, know that you are truly enough for this meal. The gifts for the people. Come, for all is ready.